Welcome to Schools Forum. I'm Andrew O'Neill, I'm the Chair of Schools Forum. This event is being held in the Town Hall and is being streamed live on YouTube, the cameras over there, where members of the public and the media are welcome to watch the meeting remotely and listen to the discussions taking place. I'd like to introduce Luke, who is doing minutes at Schools Forum for the first time, and we will go around now and introduce fellow committee members. So,
I'm Mould, I'm Chair of Partly Framework.
David Medson, I'm Head of Kensington Aldridge.
Anita Stokes, I'm the Strategic Finance Manager for Children's Services. So not a member, just advisory.
Ian Higgs, Director of Education for Kensington, Chelsea and Westminster.
Sarah Boert, Head at 2 primary schools, St Thomas's and also St Clement and St John's.
David Sons, Head at Thomas Jones School.
Kathleen Williams, Head at Survey and at St Francis and CC.
Dr. Jody, I'm Executive Head at Marlborough and Colby Primary School.
Amanda Sears, Chairman at All Saints. Mariella Archon, Head at Chelsea Academy.
Lewis, I'm Chair of Governors of Garden.
Peter Bassett, Vice Chair of Governors, Avondale.
Craig Hammersmith, Centre Principal for the North Kensington Centre, part of Morning College, London.
okay, great, thank you. Oh, and Stevie's here, from Calvon, who's just joined us. Item A1, apologies for absence. We've had apologies received from Sarah Newman, Weston Butt, and Michelle Walter. Any other apologies since? Great. Item A2, declarations of interest. Do any members have any declarations to make? No? Okay, fantastic. Item A3, minutes of the meeting held on November 7th, 2022. Are there any comments on minutes? Right, fantastic. So, is it your wish for them to be signed off as a correct record?
Agreed.
Right, thank you. Item A4 is the DSG monitoring 2023-24. Anita, over to you.
Thank you. So, forum members will recall that in November we were saying that we had an increase to the DSG that we were not expecting in relation to funding for Kensington Queens Mill, and because we had more non-Kensington borough EHCP pupils in Kensington schools than previously. And if we move on to look at the table 2 on the DSG budget monitoring, you will see that overall we're now forecasting an underspend of 652,000, which is positive. However, most of it, well, in fact, more than this figure relates to one-off funding. So the reason that the forecast has changed so much is in relation to the high needs block, and there's been a significant piece of work that's been undertaken to verify the post-16 placements. That verification has now shown that a significant number of those had ended during the pandemic. So that means that when we set up our estimated cost of 21-22, we'd obviously included estimates for students that had actually left those placements. So that means we've got 500,000 less than we estimated when we did those accruals. So that's a one-off good news. And as I say, the additional funding we received into our DSG, that's about 620,000, which is one-off. So overall, if we took the one-offs out, we'd have an overspend of about 530,000. So just putting that into context. I'll just also then just looking at the summary of the DSG. That means that we've got, as I say, a forecast underspend of 652,000, which means the cumulative deficit at the end of the year would be 6,953,000, and that is compares very favourably with our estimated, well, what was in our deficit management plan, where we estimated about 9.5 million. But just beware that a significant part of that relates to one-off benefits. And lastly, I just wanted to mention that the DSG deficit, while it's currently ring fenced from the LA's wider finances, and that's been extended to March 26. After that point, it's then part of the local authorities' balances, and it is something that the council would have to show could be covered within their overall reserves. Take any questions?
Any questions on that?
So,
Because they came out and said they didn't have any reserves, didn't they? A while ago. They actually have reserves then.
They're much lower than they were previously, so there are some reserves.
What does that actually mean?
Yeah.
When that changes, when that rule changes, what does that actually mean?
So at the moment, what it means is if because we've got a deficit, it's
Yeah.
sort of set aside, and the council doesn't have to show that they can cover that deficit. But now, once we get to 2026 and it's not set aside, it just becomes part of the overall. It's separate, but it's in the total balances or total reserves that the council holds.
What impact will that have on schools and how the system, how it works?
No, it's more. It wouldn't have any
Council
direct.
impact.
Yes, it's
They're
council
less
impact.
£6 million on their reserves.
Yeah.
Is that what you're saying?
Okay, thank you.
So can they cover it?
Yes. At this
Is everyone
stage.
guessing how much reserves the council has? If that's
Yeah.
what's going on.
Yeah, I think so. So what is their reserve?
Yeah. Yeah, we think it's about 10 million, the reserves. So obviously, we were predicting going up to about 20 million deficit, so that really would be a problem for the council.
It's not very much reserves for
No.
a council of this size, is it? So we just
Obviously, if you apply
need to
this
get
rule
this down.
across the country with significant these deficits, different positions in terms of overall council reserves, you can see why the government's pushed this back by 3 years. That they've obviously pushed it down the road by 3 years. But yes, in essence, that's what could happen in 3 years' time if that change were to be implemented.
So we need to continue reducing this deficit. That's the sizable impact it can have on the council.
I think we're required to do that anyway by the Department of Education. And Julie will talk a little bit later about an incentive, if you like, to continue to manage, at least within our in-year budgets, in relation to high needs.
Why can you get accurate information around the council's reserves and what they can be used for and what they can't use?
the accounts are published. I mean, if you,
Public information.
where is it?
public information on the website.
Okay, I hadn't found it when I looked, so.
We can,
Definitely, yeah.
we can provide
We can
this,
send
that's not
a
we
link.
need to,
That would be
we can
great,
do that
thank
through a
you.
link, yeah, no problem at all. Obviously, ultimately, it's a council decision then, how to use and if and when to use the reserves. The key obviously is to set a balanced budget overall each year.
And those reserves presumably are for all services within the council and not just.
So some of them will be very specific purposes. There has to be, generally has to be a purpose for a reserve, but that will all be set out in the accounts, yeah. They will be listed as to what they are, what they're for, what purposes.
Is it the same schools where there's a recommendation of how much you should carry on?
I think, so there is a recommendation, but it's mainly around reserves not being too low, because the amount of council reserves how much has been used in terms of council reserves and the number of councils that are going into sort of, into significant problems, yeah.
And that really is more of the issue, isn't it? So nationally, you'll be aware that there's huge pressure on adult social care and children's services budgets, and a number of large counties have flagged in 2 years' time they may not be able to set a balanced budget, but because of those particular pressures. So this is it's a national issue, and it's more about going into deficit and not setting a balanced budget in year than it is about reserves.
Can I ask Anita 2 questions? The first is just a technical question on table 1, page 2. What is NNDR?
Oh, that's the national non-domestic rates. So
Right,
rates.
okay, thank you. And the other point, Judge, I appreciate that these, the finding that you've got less placements out there is one-off. And I'm very appreciative to see the number, but presumably you start in future years from a lower base of placement. So we have got a lower am I right in thinking we've got a lower level of placements sort of initially in the budget going forward?
Yes, and you'll see that in the overall figures. It's not drawn out in the figures in the High Needs paper, but it's taken account.
It is
of.
taken account.
Yeah.
Thank you.
If I might add one further point, Andrew, then I'll be quiet. Just to give you an example, all primary schools had a letter before Christmas confirming this council had made a local decision to provide some additional funding to support families with cost of living. Now, again, that's discretionary additional funding directly from the council. You know, it could be from contingency, it could be from a departmental underspend, it could be from reserves. That was about, from memory, about 260,000, and each was a one-off
Yes.
allocation. So that'd be an example of where a council chooses locally to allocate some additional funding. I see my cabinet member has got a hand up.
I was just going to say, it actually comes from our cost of living reserves, that we put money aside because we knew that people would be under pressure. So we've taken money for that to help schools decide who they best need funding in their classes.
Fantastic. And that's a really good example of this council making a local decision to create a cost of living reserve and to use some of that money to support families directly through schools.
Can I just ask, is that in addition to the free school meals allocation that's been given? That's beginning.
Yes, so
So that will still happen, the allocation for free school meals during holidays? Is this
So
additional money?
there's the holiday and activity fund money, which
Yeah.
will still happen, so that's fine, because that's actually funded by the government. So this is an additional amount, I think it's 243,000, which will be going to primary schools only, not secondary schools. Obviously, the children that are already coming from free school meals will continue to have this, but this is what we're seeing as a 30% uplift on the group of parents who wouldn't be eligible for free school meals. This is how we've allocated and decided to put that amount of money in. But we've decided that the schools themselves know best who those children are that should be receiving that money, and whether they don't have to spend it on preschool meals. They can spend it on a breakfast club, they could spend it on some uniform, they could help their family with electricity. So we think the schools are best to know which families are struggling with which cost.
And I think linked to that, Kathleen, also, as you know, the government funds, the vouchers during the main holidays, but this council has decided locally also to fund those vouchers in half term. Hitherto, there's been a decision to continue to provide that support as well. But obviously that's reviewed each time.
And the payments, you said they're going to come in spring at the beginning and end of this month and then in April.
That's right. We're doing over 2 financial years.
Equal parts.
Is that a Poonam question?
Almost equal parts, not quite equal. We've calculated the number of days in each.
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions or queries on this paper? Okay, great. So Schools Forum is asked to note the points in 4.1 and also 4.12. I'm not going to read them all out. I think they're pretty neater as clarified both of those. Okay, we move on to paper A5. Julie is going to give an overview here to some conceptual aspects of this paper, and then Anita's going to talk about some of the financial implications. Julie.
Thank you. So this paper provides an update on the work of the High Needs Block Reference Group. It's a forecast outturn for High Needs growth. It will be 31st of March, and some recommendations for next year's budget. And I particularly wanted to draw your attention to the delivering better value work that we're doing with the Department of Education. So that's in paragraphs 4.1 onwards. And I highlighted at the last Schools Forum that this was an intensive improvement programme commissioned by the DFE to identify the highest impact changes to support children with SEND. So we just talked about what the unmitigated spend might be from the High Needs block if we weren't taking action the position that we'd be in, and the impact on the council's reserves. This is a piece of work that central government has commissioned to ensure that there are mitigations in the 55 authorities whose deficit is not quite as bad as the safety valves, but whom are all in deficit. So RBKC is eligible, has been invited to participate, because part of the programme is being able to bid for up to £1 million to undertake high needs activity. So the grant can't be used to reduce the cumulative deficit, but it is activity intended to kind of mitigate the spend plan. So in module 1 of the diagnostic stage of this work, the consultants, Newton Europe, reviewed our deficit recovery plan and our financial due diligence, and they and SIPFA, the Chartered Institute of Public Finance Accountancy, looked at all of the work that we've done in terms of what we've had forecasted for our spend, and they focus particularly on the areas that we've seen the largest, fastest growth in. So that's the fees for independent schools and top up in mainstream and special schools, and those jointly constitute 70% of the spend from the high needs block. So the Newton Europe, because there are 55 authorities taking part, have been able to kind of reflect some of the national findings, including the fact that the HCPs for autism, social, emotional, mental health, speech and language are outstripping all other need types, growing 20% faster. And in Module 3, our work following the diagnostics was really focused on, okay, so what's driving the spend? What's the root cause of our high needs spend? And what was drawn out from that was around kind of there would be better financial outcomes and better outcomes for young people if they were in local mainstream schools, if we could include more children in our own schools rather than using the independent sector. So Module 3, we've worked with them on developing a programme that will mitigate the funding pressure, and our application, which has to go in next week, will have to show how the grant can help us increase inclusion in local mainstream schools, particularly for autistic pupils, along with support for speech and language for those who haven't got an EHCP. And our application will be very heavily weighted towards ensuring we've got boots on the ground to do the training for school staff, and that what we're doing is creating capacity in schools to be able to support those children. So really sort of driving the level of expertise in schools, and schools will be key to the success of that mitigation work. We will know by mid-March if we've been successful in getting that £1 million grant. So the other part of the paper that I would particularly like to draw attention to is the top-up funding. So since April 22, we've been using the recalibrated banding tool. We did some moderation work in July to validate that the tool is now working effectively, and we've put the cap in place, and we've had temporary arrangements for a dedicated system user, which makes sure that the applications are being very robustly and consistently run through the tool. I'd like to flag up that the top-up rates for places in specialist resource provisions have remained at the same level as they were 3 years ago. So although we've reviewed the service level agreements, the host schools are identifying the cost of living pressures, and clearly those schools' budgets can't be expected to underpin that increase. There are 108 commission places in the current financial year, so if we were to apply a small inflationary increase, we'd be looking at a financial pressure there of at least 50,000. If I move on to some of the proposals, section 9.2. So through the work of the High Needs Block Review Group, we've been doing modelling of the overpayments, and we've been looking at what might be an alternative to clawback. And recommendations will be coming to forum in April. An interim recommendation that we're bringing this evening is to, we did have an interim recommendation to extend the capping to August 23, and what we're bringing this evening is a recommendation to increase that cap to take account of the inflationary pressures. So instead of having the cap set at 18,000, we're suggesting that paragraph 9.2 that the cap should be increased to 20,761 from April. So we introduced the cap April last year, so we're suggesting that it be increased from April this year. We also, in light of the pay price pressures, suggesting that from the start of the new academic year that all of the bands be increased to reflect the cost of the pay award. So I mentioned the specialist resource provisions and the cost pressures there. what we've asked all of those schools that host units to do is to send us details of their cost pressures so we can understand them in more detail, and through the work of the High Needs Block Reference Group, look at what would be an appropriate level of increase for them to take account of those cost of living pressures that they're facing. So they're the key things I wanted to draw out. Thank you.
If I just, thank you, if I just talk about a couple of the funding areas in here. One is just to mention the teachers' pay and pension contribution grant funding. That we still have to provide that separately for hospital education and alternative provision and special schools. So we're following the DFE calculation under section 6 to show the allocations for 23-24. Paragraph 7 includes additional DSG funding that's been added to our high needs block, and we have to do an increase for special schools and hospital schools and alternative provision of 3.4% per place. We're waiting some additional information on exactly how that has to be calculated. We got something at the end of last week, but have not had a chance to look at the detail. So the expectation is that all of that funding will be passed on to those providers. And it's quite a sizable. It's 949,000, so it's quite a sizable sum. And then overall, when we look at the budget setting for next year and the proposals there, we have been able to set a balanced budget in the year, including the changes that are elsewhere in this report. That takes account of estimated increases in the EHCPs and in the cost of provision. But what we're not able to do in this year is to make any contribution to the deficit recovery, which we did do in the current year in 22-23.
Okay, all right. Are there any questions from board members? Jackie?
So last year, or this financial year, we've had a £1,700 increase for every teaching assistant on average in the costs. Going into next year, they're going to get a new pay deal, and you're saying that pay deal, you're expecting that pay deal to be met with 3%.
You mean what we're proposing in terms of the increase from September?
The increase from April 23, because they get paid April to April, their pay increase to April.
So that's reflecting the average TA's increase. So we've looked at what the grades are and what those the detail that we've looked at is not. And don't forget that we'd included a 1.25% increase to national insurance last year that we've had to take out. So we've done a calculation. We've got a calculation behind that based on the average cost and the average banding, and then whether obviously they're not all full time. So we've done a detailed calculation behind that.
Percentage won't be affected by how
No, I agree. No, it's not. We're
part-time
not.
or full-time they are.
No, so the calculation that we've seen based on the grades is not showing a 10% increase.
I think the average increase was 10.7, what I saw.
I mean, I'm happy to share the calculation probably with the high needs review group. Maybe the.
That would be really helpful. I'm sorry I missed that. I didn't have Ofsted. That's.
Yeah, no, I know you sent your apologies. Yeah, that's fine. No. Absolutely agree to be transparent of how that figure's been calculated.
Because it just doesn't, 3% over 2 years in this current circumstance feels like a substantial even, cut.
Yeah, I'll share that.
Okay, we can have those in action to look at. Yeah, other questions, Sarah?
I'm just wondering about the banding tool, and whether it's perhaps gone a little bit too much the other way now, where perhaps the funding is a bit too low for some of the children. I've had a bit of a check-in with some of the other head teachers, and I think quite a lot of people are concerned now that there's not quite enough money there to actually pay for what the children need. And I feel at the moment what's happening is schools are kind of meeting. I know it's very difficult, and I know there's not lots of money, but I do feel it's all the pressure is on schools to meet the needs of children and parents' expectations and all the rest of it. And I feel like certainly I've checked with a few people, and I can certainly give an example of St Thomas's, where we've had 4 that have come back in the last few weeks, and it's given us a drop of £17,000, which is equivalent to one staff member. And the problems that I see with that, obviously that means it's going to be really hard for us to meet the increasing number of needs of children we have in the school. And I know, having checked with other schools, it's not just me saying this about my school, but I know this one well. So that just strikes me as a real worry, because I don't know how we're going to meet their needs. It's causing unbearable pressure on what's happening in schools. And I'm just wondering, when we've got some kind of savings here in the top up for maintained schools, and we're trying to promote inclusion in mainstream schools, if there isn't enough money in that part of the budget, that seems to be where we should be focusing some, our funding and support. I'm sure everyone would agree with that. I don't know quite how we get there, but I am really, really worried about it, and I do think it makes it very difficult for us to keep children included in mainstream if we're not actually funded well enough for them. I think particularly with very young children, they need quite a lot of adult attention. It's very hard to be quite so flexible. And the other thing that seems to happen as well is that when the banding tool is decided, the money gets cut off right at that point. So now, but actually I've employed somebody right through until July, and so the school has got to make up the shortfall. So I guess I suppose what I was thinking is, it would be good if we're looking at the cost pressures on some of the special schools and some of those. Maybe we ought to look at the cost pressures, the actual cost of living pressures on some of the mainstream schools that hold high levels of EHCs, and have a look what's going on there as well, because I suspect that this is becoming very, very difficult. And I certainly know the personal toll it's taking on members of staff, especially my SENCO. I'm really worried about the retention of SENCOs, and I know that's something, again, that other heads have flagged up to me in primary schools, that we're finding it very hard.
Sickness levels for people working with children with high needs as well.
Because it's just I've presented you with a massive
No, it's fine.
I'm not expecting you to answer.
No,
But
absolutely.
I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't say how worried I am about it.
Yeah, no, absolutely happy to answer that. So colleagues will remember that when we did the recalibration, that we brought along a report that showed how we'd costed the actual provision specified in plans. And so that's the kind of principle underneath the recalibration. And we did the moderation exercise in July, where we brought lots of appendices for children, individual anonymised children, and we worked through them with the group of head teachers who confirmed that the banding that was allocated matched the needs that were in the plan. And what we're proposing to do this term is a further moderation. So invitations have gone out to ask colleagues to come in and make sure that the rate that's being applied, the bands being applied, actually matches the needs that are described in the individual EHCP and the provisions that are required in the EHCP. So that further moderation, that check and balance is in hand to do. In paragraph 9.2, I was acknowledging there the pay price pressure on the actual cash value of the bands, and the suggestion that we would want to increase those from September to take exactly that account of the fact that things are costing more money than they were when we set the banding level. So that's kind of picking up that. I think the point about when there's an annual review, as the outcome of the annual review, run the child's needs back through the tool, and if the band is coming out lower, and it's likely to, because the recalibration is adjusting it back to what it should be. When we introduced that, so we had a child who put through at band 7, and now they run back through the tool and they're band 5.
Can I just mention something then, that the children who I'm talking about, children who've not been banded before, and it's coming much lower than their EHC is recommended, just to point in. So
Right, so
it's not
the
about
way
the
that
calibration of the banding, it's about the first time through, it's coming very low.
it's the first annual review
The first one that's gone
of
through
the
the
brand
banding
new
tool.
plans.
But so no, old plans that were awarded before, all
Right.
of them are old plans.
So
This
it's
is the
as a
first
result
time
of an
they've
annual
gone
review.
through
Yeah.
the tool process after an annual review.
Yeah. So what's happening now is, following an annual review, they're going through a recalibrated system rather than the original system. So they are coming out with lower bands. So they may have been a 7 before, but they're now coming out as 5s. When we introduced the capping, we did put in place a safety net for the summer term, because we recognised that people would have staffing commitments and they would need time to think about, how to manage the change. What we're seeing now is as annual reviews are happening and the recalibration is applying, yes, those changes are impacting immediately. And I can see that if you had a number of annual reviews that had happened at the same time, there would be an impact. And I think at the time we talked about a safety net for schools who were in deficit or likely to go into a deficit, didn't we?
Yes.
To mitigate the impact on any individual school. And we also said that through the SEM manager that we would look at if a school kind of wanted to say, hey, hold on a minute, it's been a cumulative effect here on my school that's causing unnecessary hardship.
Yeah.
That might be something.
Schools with high proportions of SEN.
Yeah.
So who would they
In the
go
book.
to for that?
So well, I'm just saying that might be something that the forum wants to consider again. Then, if schools are seeing that might be a risk.
And does that link maybe to your request, Sarah, about can we review this again? And Julie's saying, well, actually, we're going to do a further moderation process this term, and maybe the findings of that process obviously seem to be accurate last time around. If things have changed and we recognise the pressures colleagues are facing, we bring the feedback from that moderation back, and if there is consideration about mitigation, obviously, everybody's aware of the concepts we work within. We're making these changes because actually if we don't do it locally, the DfE will require us to do it because we're £7 million overspent. But I think there is the flexibility to look again, with everybody's participation in a further moderation process.
So it's basically the accumulation of plans being recalibrated or changed and falling off a cliff. The accumulation of
I
those
think it is, and that it wasn't. I
tops
did
up.
check with other schools that it's not just me. And I think it's something that is happening in other schools as well.
Is it possible to work out the impacts for individual schools, particularly those with, say, above 5% EHC plan?
We can do some modelling, yes, but I think we need to
If
agree.
we have the moderation and we bring it back at the same time, because the recommendation is that the review group brings back the outcome of revisiting the top-up rate for the top-up rate for the places in specialist provisions. So we could bring it back as part of the same paper.
And could we look at the cost pressures for schools that carry high levels of EHCs?
Well, we've still got the targeted funding in place. So if you're spending more than 50% of your notional budget on the first 6,000, that refund is still in place.
So take St Thomas as an example. So we have, I think, 7 children above our 6,000 kind of notional. So we've got 15 children, 9 of which are covered for the first 6,000, and then the other 7 are not. So we get 3,000 for each of those. So just do the maths on that as 7 times 3. So we're £21,000 short there as well. So add to that then the £17,000. You get. I mean, I just think probably everyone's struggling with this kind of thing who are very inclusive schools. So we're £40,000, or I can't remember do the maths right now, but we're a lot short. And and falling roles. And I'm sure it is a really, I'm sorry to bang on, but it is a really, that's why I'm thinking a whole thing around the cost pressures that are all accumulating here, which it's not one piece, it's many pieces of the jigsaw that are all falling in. And I can see the very good intentions that people have had to try and solve these problems, but it's when you accumulate them all together in a school that is very inclusive, that it is very problematic.
And high medical need is under pressure because there's no compromise there at all in terms of the child needs somebody to be with them the whole time, and you need to pay the full cost of that. So if you've got several children that have got high medical needs, then that is another contributing factor. The other thing I just wanted to ask is, what are we doing about private placements? Because we talked about this quite a lot, and this borough still, despite us best efforts, still has a high level of private placements. So what are we doing to reduce the number of those? Because I don't think all the pressure should be on mainstream schools that are inclusive.
I think did you talk about this at the last meeting?
Yeah, so as part of the delivering best value work, as part of the diagnostic, we did case reviews of 35 high cost placements to look at what it was that led those children, young people to be placed in the independent sector, and the two kind of themes that emerged were lack of parent confidence in mainstream schools and inclusive practice in mainstream schools. And we followed that up with a survey of practitioners in schools and a survey of parents to kind of find out a little bit more about that. And it was parents said it was because the school had said we can't meet your child's needs, that's why your child should be moved to a special school, and that's why we want the focus of our grant application to the DFE to give us the resources to put the training in place so that parents don't hear that message that we can't meet your child's needs, because actually we've got skilled staff in schools who are able to go a long way towards meeting needs that perhaps we're not meeting at the moment.
And this is just, sorry, Kathy, I was just going to say, put my glasses back on, 3.3, our independent post-16 spend, that is still a pressure, and we've acknowledged previously, our spend is higher, and we have a higher number of 16 to 25-year-olds with education, health and care plans, and within that cohort, we have a higher number of placements in the independent sector than we would like. So as well as what Julie said about pre-16, that is an ongoing piece of work, including with partners such as Morley. I see Craig at the end of the table there, to try and have more state, college or sixth form placements at post-16. That's still a pressure for us as well.
But is it just a sort of vibe of the parent body in Kensey, because there is such a high proportion of children generally that are educated in the private sector, that when they sort of chat with their mates, etc., they lean towards the independent sector if they are able to. If they can specify an independent sector school, do they get it? Can we not push back against that?
Probably, well, it's as much about...
Yeah, I think it's just a hard push in mainstream schools is just it's relentless.
And
I think you know,
especially if the school's popular for it as well.
We seem to acquiesce to people who are saying, well, I just don't have confidence in mainstream schools.
I don't think we can push back on that.
So there are two things, aren't there? So obviously we've got a new state special school locally, we never used to have one.
Yeah.
We've got ever more resource-based places, as I call them. So if parents want a specialist place, we can say, hang on, you don't need to go to the independent sector. We've got a specialist local state place. We also have mainstream, and at post-16, I think we are making some inroads to say, because with those parents and those young people, you have to be able to say there is a local state alternative at post-16. Maybe not in this borough, in a local borough, and for a lot of those young people and their families historically, we haven't had that state alternative. It's often a specialist college, you know, maybe several boroughs away. We've also got a transport cost that's not shown here. So that's part of our ongoing work. I guess we do work with St Charles Sixth Form College, as I mentioned with Morley, other local sixth forms to try and find state alternatives at post-16, because if we can put that to parents, we can also make a decision at panel, can't we, to say actually it will be the state post-16 placement over the independent, as long as we have an alternative to offer.
I'm sorry, is it the case that normally with any parent who has a child with an EHCP, they can specify their school? So do they by law then have the right to specify an independent sector
It's
school?
slightly different, right? And I've given the legal reference in para 5.1, where it says the parent can make representations under Section 9 of the 96 Act.
But then it's the panel that can make.
Well, no, it comes down to cost. So what the legal definition is, the legal definition is about use of the public purse. And so there is a cost threshold. So if the school of the parent's choice is within kind of 8,000-9,000 of the cost of the maintained sector, the Section 9 of the 96 Act does kick in. And
including all the transportation and whatever the
whole cost of the public purse. So often when we're negotiating with families, they are quite surprised about how much transport will cost. So last week I had a conversation with a mum who wanted a taxi with an escort, and I was saying to her, it's £3,000 more for the escort.
This is first name Prince.
This is a 25-year-old. So remember, by law, we're funding provision up to 25. That's our biggest problem. The government changed the law, but they haven't funded those changes properly. So that's one of our challenges. But yes.
So we do take all of that into account, and it's the total cost of the public purse. But what would be better, I mean, those 35 cases that we looked at, we could see the phased transfer point and a parent not being confident, a school perhaps saying to the parent when they were looking around, well, we haven't got anybody here with that training. And so we're thinking that through the Delivering Better Value programme, we can do a lot of work to make sure that the training is in place, but also some work to share amongst professionals what the local offer is and to give people confidence that way.
Yeah, I mean, I think that sounds great, but the issue is we're getting less and less bodies on the ground, so I worry about who'll be left to train. You know, that's the.
Well, class
that's
teachers,
the
we're actually
issue.
pitching for training for class teachers.
But class teachers have to teach, I mean, their core job is to teach a class. I mean, it is delusional, I think, you know, in terms of to think a class teacher can meet the medical needs of a child with SEN whilst teaching a class. I mean,
We are pitching this at speech and language needs of children in reception in year one and children with autism in
It
secondary.
is, but within reason. I mean, come on.
Not,
I mean,
not, we're
within
not pitching
reason.
this at children with diabetes, you know, it's a very, very small low incidence, but the volume here is around speech and language reception, year one, autism. You know, autism is our most prevalent need type.
Okay, actually, we've got quite a few people with questions, so we're going to Jagdeep and Chris and then Peter.
Firstly, about the independent schools, obviously 732,000 overspent in there, and I'm wondering, is that because of new placements that weren't expected, or is it because of something? Earlier you told us that there was children that had come off of needing to be paid for because of the pandemic and they're no longer in provision. I presume some of those were in private as well. So that overspend has actually come down from what you could have been. So what's going wrong with our forecasting, or what's going wrong with the actual amount of children, you know, where is that?
So the post-16 issue is it's a bit of a one-off, and it's because young people above statutory school age could choose to walk out of one college and rock up at another college. Yeah. So you know, when they're moving schools, we do the consultation, but young people they, you know, for all sorts of reasons, don't they? They decide their friends are at that college. That's not the course they want to do. So during the kind of lockdown stage, we were cautious about young people who disappeared from a particular college, and then we had to look and see if we could find them at other colleges, and in the end we had to write to them, speak to their parents, try to contact them. But what we had to do, because of the impact of COVID, is make sure that the resources that were there to put in place a provision specified in their plan could be mobilised if they decided that they wanted to return. And so we've been through a really detailed exercise during the autumn term of tracking all of those young people and trying to find out what they are. But coming back to your point about, you know, are there more placements in the independent sector? There are a few new placements. As a percentage, it's high, but the numbers are very small. It's just that they're really expensive placements. We've got, you know, some placements cost 250,000 a year.
When that happens, and it's not the efficient use of resources, it doesn't meet that criteria, why aren't we able to say no?
Well, we do say no, and some parents appeal to the tribunal. On some of them, some young people move in and they're already at those placements. So those decisions have been made by another local authority. So there are all sorts of reasons why, you know, some families can afford to place their children at these settings and then ask for a statutory assessment. The young people haven't even got a plan. So all sorts of routes in. Lots of gatekeeping is in place, but the statutory framework definitely gives parents the right to ask.
So I did have one other question, and that was about the £3,000. It's good that we get that, but I don't really understand at what point it kicks in.
It's measured by finance through the census.
On how many? At what point?
Right, so it varies for every school, doesn't it? It's when your notional budget for your school, if you divide that in half, so 50% of your notional budget, and then you divide that by 6,000, the number that it gives you is the number of EHCPs.
Sorry, say that again.
It's probably more of a kind of a Senko forum piece.
Is that the number of children you have reception to 6?
Yeah, it'd just be helpful to
Nursery to
understand that.
6?
Reception to 6, yeah, and then
7.5% of your budget should be is notionally allocated to SEN. It's not real money. It's 7.5% of your budget you could spend on SEN, and that's how much government says it's likely to cost you. Of that 7.5%, then cut these in your half.
Yeah.
We did very well out of this, other than the fact that, of course, you've got so many EHCPs, and you still need the other 3,000, and that's the number you're trying to figure out.
I think this bit sounds like something to take into heads consultative meetings. To just
It'd be great to have a spreadsheet with just what our numbers are, wouldn't it? I know you've told me mine, thank you very much.
Yeah, we can share
I
that.
think
Yeah,
go
it is
to
done.
heads
Yeah, done.
meetings.
And also when you say, but yeah, I'd like to know a lot more about that. I'm trying to work out what is our budget. Is that the block or is that all of our budget?
So it's the notional SEN, but anyway, yeah, we can share the our
Stick on the
calculation.
specific
There's a-
topic, the paper.
Bit of a definition in para 512, I did try to explain it in 512, but a bit more.
Okay, Chris.
Lovely, thank you. I'm talking about delivering best value, and it's in the context of this conversation actually. I'm going down to 4.5, where it says that schools will be key to successfully delivering the change programme. Now, what I heard you say earlier, you talked a bit about delivering the message, it's better. But actually, I'm just wondering, what sort of evidence base are you using in relation to making that transformation in parents' decisions? You know, because you must be learning this from somewhere, otherwise there's, you know, point with it ourselves. And the other is, how are you engaging with school leadership in relation to what this actually means, which is another shed load of work in relation to training. I can't remember who made the point, but we're going to be classroom teachers and already actually delivering the curriculum. And I take your point that this is very specific around speech and language and other areas. But I suppose that the question is, have school leaders been involved in the grant application in relation to, you know, missing the deadline? And what's that actually going to look like?
So the grant's really detailed, there's like 30 pages of data, evidence to back up the application. What I can tell you is in the funding that we're pitching for, we are pitching for some resources for schools to have the capacity to take part in the training. So we're also hoping that we would be able to have a secondment from schools to be part of the programme rollout. So there'll be an opportunity for schools to be part of how we mobilise this, how we implement it, if we get the funding.
And to fund the secondments, I guess.
Sorry, to fund the secondments.
To fund the
So
secondments.
who's been involved in that, in relation
So,
to school leaders, the heads, the middle leaders?
So over 40 professionals were involved in the case reviews, which were to get to the root cause of what are the challenges that need to be part of the bidding. Senkos were part of the survey that was the next layer. Parent Carer Forum were part of the survey. And there've been a number of things that I've written out to schools to kind of keep them up to speed with how this is going. But it's been a really intensive programme. With a number of us have had to go on residentials to Milton Keynes twice.
I can say that because I live in Milton Keynes.
It was wonderful.
I think that's amazing. You know, you've gone off on residential, but actually the big hard work is going to be at this bit here.
The delivery, absolutely.
So I'm still not entirely clear how schools are getting engaged in actually, because that's going to be how it's.
So part of the pitch is that in order to address inclusion in mainstream schools, we can deliver some training. We've got the capacity and inclusion service. We can write the training. We can put it on. But schools have to have the space to be able to do that. And so what we want to do is have a seconded senior leader from schools to work with us on what that rollout programme would look like. So that this is over 2-3 years. We're going to be doing this piece of work. So the detail will come from having a school leader alongside us saying, right, these are the outcomes that we want. These are the commitments we've made to the DFE to mitigate the 30 million overspend by 2026. If we, you know, these are the things we need to tackle. And the diagnostic data has said, if autism and speech and language is outstripping every other need type, growing 20% faster, they're the things that we know we need to focus on. So all of those kind of bits of diagnostic come together to say these are the key threads of the grant application.
And I guess with the second part of that, obviously there'll be a lot more engagement with schools if we get the bid. I mean, just to clarify, to my mind, the DFE is set in place an incredibly bureaucratic set of who. Yeah, my colleagues haven't got the time to go on residential. They don't want to go on residential. The DfE has required colleagues to do all of this just so
To be eligible.
in order to then to write the £1 million bid. You know, obviously we're all by borough, we're working in Westminster too, they're not part of this programme, you know, so we're really hopeful we can get an extra £1 million into KNC to support children with SEN. If we do, we'd obviously love to know really more on
Spend a
it.
million to get there.
Absolutely, Kathy, absolutely.
Thanks for the work on that as well,
You
Peter.
sound really excited by it. Obviously, a lot of work has gone into it. But
Sorry, Peter.
No, David, go on, because it sounds like a
in real
product.
terms, I mean, do you think it's very likely? Do you think it's likely? It's 50-50?
We've had really good feedback from the consultants. I hope they're not just massaging our egos, but they are saying,
How
you
much
know,
do they
that
cost?
their work here, they're saying has been, you know, we're far more cited on our cost pressures, and we understand where they're coming from. And so all of our forecasts had to be evaluated by SIPFA, and they've given us a confidence rating, and you know, they wanted to give us 75%, and we negotiated them to 80, you know, in terms of their belief that we can deliver this.
So we're hopeful,
Yeah.
we're hopeful.
Yeah.
Okay, great, thank you, Peter.
Thanks.
One question and one point. First of all, how much do you think has been saved by recalibrating the EBT tool, and which area of spend does it come out of?
Yeah. Off the top of my head, I think it could be as much as £1 million that is being saved.
Okay, and where has it come out of in the budget? I mean,
So that's in the top up, maintained and top up
Section 8.
academies.
Yeah.
Section 8 in the table.
okay, thank you. The other point I'd like to make a point that I've always tried in ABSA's finance committee to sort of tutor our wonderful head teacher and others that mesh together the finance models and their legal commitment to employ staff. And I'm very much with Sarah's point that if you get a change in EPT, it's bad practice just to cut it off, because you've got a offsetting the EHCP, you've got a employment contract, and this employment contract is not breakable, and therefore somehow, I guess at an enhancement point, I'd like, I accept that bandings and support will change, but you must actually run up to the end of the employment contract for which the original person has been employed.
If I could respond to that, just the reason we're saying a million is because that's the extent of the overspend the year before, before the recalibration. But just coming back to the point about employment, the notion of top up from the high needs block is that it's intended to augment. So we're working with a national system that doesn't recognise that you can't employ someone for 15 minutes twice a week. That you have to have people there in order to resource the intervention that they're carrying out. But the whole premise of top-up funding for high needs is that it is literally to resource the interventions that are prescribed in the HCP and not the kind of core staffing. And I think that's one of the biggest tensions in the system.
But would you look at the safety net as part of your overall review that you're doing at the moment on moderation?
Sorry?
Could you look at a safety net?
Like a further safety net.
We can look at how we might mitigate the impact on individual schools of changes cumulative from annual review. But I think a really important message, and questions are coming back from SENCO, so it would be helpful if we could ensure that there's really good link between the information that we discuss with head teachers and what goes to kind of SENCO level about how some of this is working, because we've known since April 22 that the recalibrated system is likely to result in bandings that are at a lower level, because we could see that that was the difference that we need to do, and we've known since the moderation the impact of running it back through the tool is a lower band.
And we agreed that approach here at Forum, of course, last year.
Okay, thank you. David, did you solve the question?
Just very quickly, on the independent school piece, it seems to me that if you want to persuade parents away from independent schools towards state schools that have specialist resource bases, then strategically you could open new resource bases in the state schools that are most popular with parents who are weighing independent or state. To my mind, that would be Holland Park and Fox, would be those two schools. But the other thing I was thinking just about independent schools generally, because more than half of kids in the RBKC are educated at independent schools, aren't they? So with Labour in 2024 and the VATs going onto the independent school fees, which seems pretty nailed on, you've got a 20% increase in fees. Now maybe those 50% parents will just absorb that 2% increase, I don't know. But maybe there's more kids coming back into the state sector. So this is not for now, but for a future meeting, I'd be interested if officers have thought about that scenario, that big change in national policy, which I feel like there can't be many local budgets that would be more effective than KNC.
I think that's a really good point there, and obviously that's why we do the graphs and come on to the projections. That's why we do it annually, because there's something we just can't predict that have happened that really affected our numbers or some of those changes. Obviously, we've been looking at cost of living very carefully to see if parents can say, well, actually, can we still afford an independent school placement? I mean, Julie's given some examples of parents who hitherto have funded provision for their child with SEN in independent sets themselves. They're now saying, hang on, we'd like a new statutory assessment. That child might be 12, 13 years old, and we're having to do that. So we will look at all those impacts. Obviously, for independent schools, you've got two types. You've got independent schools that are charities that would be affected by that change, and then, if you like, you've got the profit-making sector, which is a bit different. So.
Thanks, Ian. Steve.
So there's lots going through my mind. First thing, I need to declare an interest because my son is in a KNC school and has an EHCP. But for most cases, what there are, the add-ons, 15 minutes between things like, most EHCPs do relate to one-to-one support, small group support, and our contracts of employment with learning support systems do actually say that they're attached generally to a named child or named children. So that sort of goes slightly at odds with what you were saying earlier. And because they're attached to those children, it's the duration that child is in your school. So I suppose I'm just wondering if that fits with your model, because we are employing these people attached to the child that they're looking after, or one-to-one support, for 5 or 7 years of their career, not just 15
Stephen,
years.
after 2 years, people are entitled to a permanent contract, so that is
Also, I think there's been a move away from schools naming specifically.
Yeah, we don't have event-linked contracts at all
We just have
international.
permanent. I know. I was thinking of that.
But that's contention, isn't it, Julie? That's that national piece there about the advice we give and are given is around the participant linked to a one-to-one, as we often say, Velcro to a child. But the reality, I know on the ground.
I suppose my question is this is the complication. We're in a situation where we're being asked to work collaboratively, and that we get. That together we're going to save a small fortune and reduce the deficit. But government has kicked us into the long grass. 3 years? It's not going to be in the accounts, and it's going to be an election in 2 years, and we'll see what happens then. But in the meantime, we have the problem that we have these people, and we are going to have to make them redundant because we can't afford to keep them. Is the council going to help us with those redundancy costs? Because otherwise they fall on the schools, and it just adds more pressure.
I think that would just then follow the scheme for financing schools. It would depend on your reserve position, whether or not it falls in line with that.
For maintain schools, not for academies.
So in all situations, it's how much reserves you've got. If you kept some money for a rainy day, that's going
This
to
is
get
it.
used.
Well, that's the- yeah, that's it.
And because that is the point, isn't it? We've got one school deficit in this borough. I think we've got 10 in Westminster. So I was talking to Chair of the Finance Committee a few weeks ago, saying she advised her fellow governors, now is the time to dip into reserves. That is the situation we're in.
Jackie, you talked about inherent pressures within the system. I mean, when the NEHC is funded, you take the first 6,000, then you're only funding the hours that a child, or the amount that's within the actual plan. The plan is then funded at less than inflation cost. And so the cumulative pressure on what you can actually do with that money is less and less. And as Sarah's saying, it doesn't quite match what we're expected to do with it. And then, if you're an inclusive school and you've got 40 children with plans, which I've got to do in one school, you've then got to, that's 40 children who have been underfunded. And then, on top of that, you're asking the school to carry on being inclusive, and we will be, because that's what we do. But actually, our ability to do that is going to be seriously impinged. And I think it's a false economy, because some of those children who don't meet their needs will go private, and that small amount of money that you saved at 4%, 5% or 10%, given the increase of the schools, will end up being a large pot of money in the private sector.
And that's why we absolutely want to create specialist provision that's equivalent. So satellites at Kensington Queen's Mill,
which is great.
You know, and specialist resource provision. So those who need something over and above, we can still meet their needs in the maintained sector, and we're not paying a fee that's got a kind of profit element to it to the independent sector. You know, we need a range of provision to recognise a range of the children, but there are some economies of scale because we know that there's the volume of children with autism and there's the volume of children with speech and language who haven't got a plan.
I think on what you're saying there, Jodie, it's not just SEN that's funded at less than inflationary cost. It's everything. It's the whole school system.
In the last meeting, Andrew, you told me that 5% wasn't going to be achieved.
Well, I know, you're right about that.
Yeah.
We did get that, but let's
yeah,
just wait and see what we have to budget next
year. But we're actually now at a situation where inflation is 2% more than we thought it was, 1% more than we thought it was going to be. And actually, government for other pots have been, given us larger increases than we thought. Yet we're going to get less within this pot. So I think we should look at it again.
Can I just, sorry, I was a bit thrown by the mention of the 3% increase. Actually, the 3% increase is just what we have to increase the special schools by. On top of that, they've got the additional grant, which is at least 3.4%. The way we've calculated for instance, if we look at the cap, that's actually gone up by 11.4%.
Yeah, which is brilliant.
So it's not just 3%.
Is that every on the band, every band?
So when we've done the calculation of the other bands to come to the 425, I can't remember the exact percentage, but we've done the same calculation. So I will share it, but it's definitely not 3%.
Every band is moving proportionately with that cap.
Yes.
From September.
Can I just clarify, on all of these calculations,
but I need to share it with you too.
Yeah. That you are projecting going forward, you're still only just balancing the budget
in
year, and it's only going to dent the deficit that we've already amassed over these number of years.
Yeah.
So whilst we've all got exactly the same cost pressures, there's quite frankly no more money, is what you're saying. Obviously, we should move on to the next item because that's slightly more positive. I mean, I think we've all got the same problem, and it's making ends meet with our most vulnerable children. In fact, I think issues that we've talked about in the past.
Can I just build on that point just very quickly? Just thinking, I wonder what's going on in other local authorities around the country and what they're doing in terms of pushing back on this kind of pressure. Is everyone breaking even like we are, or are they just increasing their deficits?
It's a national
because in a way, it's where do you stand on this? What's going to make the government see that this is not sufficient? And what do they want to prioritise with their money? Is education important? Are these children's special needs important? And we don't want to let them off the hook here.
No, I'm just sorry, Jules. Yeah. We continue to lobby. Obviously, we're here to talk about schools funding this evening. Yeah. We have touched on local government funding because we spoke about the transport budget. local government funding is not increasing. Okay, it's not increasing. We still have to fund that transport budget. We try and have the best, most efficient contract we can. Julie and the team have a really clear, travel assistance policy. But Julie gave an example of, a really difficult conversation we're having with a parent with a 25-year-old about a passenger assistant in a taxi. So the pressures are across the system. They're definitely there with schools, but they're also there for ourselves as well. And potentially, as Nita said, in 3 years' time, that deficit may hit our balance sheet. So, I can say, I'm looking at Catherine too, we continue to lobby to say schools and local government need more funding. Rest assured, we continue to lobby on that point.
Can I just briefly ask a post-16 question? Does that impact some of your decision making in terms of funding post-16 students to study out of borough? So if it is more cost effective for you not to be paying travel costs. I mean, for example, we've got other local authorities, not RBKC, who have refused to allow students to continue with us this year because they won't fund the travel.
So post-16 travel has a slightly different statutory framework to it. So there's an entitlement if you live more than walking distance, and that entitlement is not quite the same when you're over 16. So we would encourage young people to think about, we produce a separate policy on the local offer which says these are the ways that you might be able to get funding. So we wouldn't block it, but we would be saying think about how you're going to get there. So this week I met with the principal of Southwark College, which is a young person who's travelling there. That's fine, because that young person wants to do that course and they want to be there, but we're not going to put on a taxi, because a taxi's not going to come to take you to work. So, that's the kind of the messaging around that, being really transparent about what is available as support and what isn't. But I just wanted to quickly come back on the point about influencing central government and giving the messages up. The 55 local authorities who are taking part in the delivering better value have been subject to the same level of diagnostic analysis by SICFA and by Newton Europe, and Newton keeps telling us these are the findings that have emerged, which is why in 4.4 I shared with you the things that they said about, the unmitigated spend projections are likely to be understated by 20% because of pay price, and a further 12% because nationally special schools are full and local authorities are having to use the independent sector. They have assured us that they are feeding all of that diagnostic back to the DfE.
And I know you want to move on, Andrew. In 3.5, we're really clear that our demand for EHCPs, whilst it's going up, it's at 3%. Nationally, it's 10%. London, it's 8%. So, working with you all, including Post-16, there is something we're doing right to try and maintain confidence in support at SEN support level.
Thanks, Ian. Mariella.
Just very quickly to go to Sarah's point, I think there is something about using parent power to lobby, and we've talked about this at secondary heads around parental engagement with the whole SEND agenda. That's not necessarily for this group, but I think ultimately they are affected because it's their child or their children. And having come from other local authorities with even higher overspend, we're not alone here. So I wonder whether there's some work collectively we can do to get our parents to lobby, and they've got the power of the votes as well.
I think that, going back, I think the government knows full well what the issues are at SEND, knows the green paper, but mentioned a 5.4% increase, Jack, that you forecasted. Let's just wait, that's from April, let's just wait and see what the pay increases will get announced on July the 20th, because I wouldn't be surprised if it's massive. Steve?
I'm very conscious of how much time we spend on this matter. I think we're all sorts of in agreement, but the one thing that I haven't really heard mentioned too much about is the out-of-borough children, because while I am taking board 30% agree, the fact is, in our school, I'm sure in other schools.
You mean non-resident in Kensington?
Non-resident Kensington children coming in borough, because we're still faced with the fact that we're not getting funded for those, and we're way over our notional funding already. So is there any help that can be given from the local authority for those?
We do count them in the targeted.
Yeah,
we do count them in the targeted, so you get your 3,000s back, even if they're not our residents.
It's still 3,000 short, therefore, and it's still...
That's still pretty generous of RBKC to be funding non-resident.
I'm not disputing that. A bit of me is in awe, Julie, but a bit of me is also conscious that we need help as well.
So why do we do that?
Because we receive funding within our overall high needs block.
For our numbers on roll.
Numbers on roll, yeah.
money comes in.
It's, I think that's a very, very specific issue to move, given those.
No, the idea is that whole 6,000 is funded from schools' budgets, but we're just, and a lot of authorities don't do this targeted support, we're saying we know that there's an issue, so what we think is, looking at their overall budget, we'll fund 3,000 where you go over the half, so we don't have to do that at all. And a number of authorities don't do any targeted support.
If we chose not to do that, then the most inclusive schools would no longer be able to do that at all. And that would then lead to massive cost pressures in the system.
Yeah.
So Andrew says that, it's might be unique to us, but I don't think it is. I thought, out above children in KNC schools is quite significant.
I'll just clarify that point. It's going to be more specifically unique to you compared to a school located centrally in the borough. The diaspora of boroughs that you have to, and I don't envy you and your admin team having to contact about 20 boroughs to get.
And your review's done.
Yes. Okay, right. So we've got no money in SEN.
We have some recommendations.
So we do have some recommendations and I think some things, additional actions that we've got there on providing some additional stats and really looking at the sort of safety net issues. But the ones that officers put out are School Forum is asked to approve the high needs block budget for 23-24 set out in section 8 and to note the following points that are at the end of your papers. I hope that everybody can see those. The high needs block forecast BSG cumulative deficit position, the proposed area of inclusion for the DBV grant, the 23-24 funding for teachers' pay, and hospital providers. Officers will implement the recommendations related to the capping of bands 8 to 10 increases to other tops, and that's from April. Is that correct? And also
capping from April, the other bands from September.
But also looking at an action to look at schools with high levels of FDN to see what the fall off, the cliff.
The impact of annual reducing banding.
I think that's part of the agreed moderation session. It's going to happen again this term.
So in the next bullet point when we say the top up to SRP will be reviewed along with the impact of annual reviews reducing banding.
Yeah, so we get that. The forward plan for the high HMB-RG, the updated deficit recovery plan, and that will come to forum in 2023. Okay.
Yeah, we need to approve.
Oh, do we approve? Oh, yes. Hands up to approve the high needs budget for 2024. Yeah. Yep, okay, thank you. Right, let's move on to paper A6. Anita, this is open to you, and I think there's some good news in here. Just to note that in the appendices, there are some falling roles allocations, but we're going to bounce that into A7 because it makes sense to do that at the same place. Anita, to you.
Yeah, so looking at some of the headlines, this is better news than SEN high needs funding. Looking at table 1 on page 33. So we are seeing within the overall DSG an increase of 5.32%, and there's a typo on paragraph 2.2 where it says an increase of 75.3%. If only that were true. Yeah, that should be 5.32. I don't know how it goes to 75.3. So good news overall there. And then when we look at the schools block in particular, and as Andrew said, we'll come back to the falling roles proposal. But at the moment, we've got that in as a proposed deduction of 106,000, but that's subject to the discussion on the next paper. Or on the falling roll paper. And so overall, when we look at the schools block that would be distributed, there's a 1.3% increase. There's this new mainstream schools additional grant allocation, the MSAG, don't we love it? That would mean that once you take that into account and look at the per pupil funding, it's actually an increase of 5.9% per pupil 4.8% overall. I appreciate schools with falling roles, that can mean that there is still an issue. So you've got your indicative school budgets for 23-24, which was the moving 15% closer to the NFF factor formulas and the minimum funding guarantee of an increase of 0.5%. And that's now all everything's based on the October census. So there's another issue on 4.2 where it says an additional 849,000. It's actually an additional 1,068,000. Once we take that new grant, the MSAG, into account, it's actually an increase of 3,857,000. I think that's the main points that I wanted to raise.
Okay, any questions on paper A6? Obviously there's got the same formulas in there that we agreed at the last meeting, but there's a sizable increase in what's coming to the top there, so.
Moving swiftly on.
Is everyone just happy?
Straight to recommendation.
I
We can go straight to recommendation.
Yeah.
Bit on your head.
Okay, fine. Schools Forum are recommended to 7.1 agree the local funding formula that distributes 81 million pounds of funding. 7.12 note the Schools Forum 7th of November confirmation of the agreement to transfer £409,503 from the schools block to the Highney's block as part of the deficit management plan that was agreed last summer. 7.13 note the mainstream schools additional grant to be confirmed later this term. Agree the £90,000 for travel children teaching support in 2 schools. 7.15 agree the de-delegation of funds to cover trade union support. It's for maintained schools only. 7.16 confirm the de-delegation agreed at estimated fund there to for reorganisation costs where maintained schools meet the related requirements that are in the scheme for financing school. Again, that's for maintained schools only. 7.17 confirm the de-delegation to fund loss of school intervention broken grounds which is used to fund statutory school improvement support and intervention in LA maintained school grant funding, again for maintained schools only. All in agreement.
Yeah.
Okay, all right, great, thank you. Right, paper A7, this is review falling roles. So we discussed parts of this at the last meeting, and then we did a working party, Mariella shared that, and then officers have also been looking at this as well. So Mariella, should we start with you, just give us a summary of the meeting?
So thank you to the colleagues that joined that working party into Anita, who put some really helpful information. We spent some time discussing what other local authorities do, particularly those in London. I think it's only 24 local authorities actually have falling roles funding. Most, or half of those are in London. And so we came to really the points in the recommendations we're bringing to this meeting on page 50, which is to limit the allocation to schools to a maximum of 2 years. So that's a reduction of 1 year. But to maintain the current funding of 100%, which is actually different from our neighbouring borough, closest borough, Westminster. We did also, some members raised the issue that some schools have taken significant numbers of the Afghan evacuees, and so obviously that could have an impact on falling roles, and our schools that have been funded for that, and we agreed that was quite generous, that funding, how that would then play out with this wider falling roles piece.
Oh, specifically we said we should X them out.
Yeah.
Yes.
I think there was a difference of opinion actually when we actually discussed it. We came out having discussed it with a different view at the end of the meeting, and then the view has now changed in the paper. But that's my recollection.
Yeah, I think you're right. There's some members felt one thing, others felt another.
And by the end of the meeting, we'd actually decided not to treat all children as children within the borough equally. That's all right.
Okay, well, I mean, I think
Yeah.
I think officers have also looked at this separately and looked at the impact that it will have on DSG. Ian?
Yeah, we're really happy to ask that. Again, thank you to colleagues who, as people know, have been sitting in this room for some years saying, let's have a look at the falling roles criteria, let's spend a bit of time, perhaps in the work group, to really unpick it, mindful of the fact that this is an increasing, the pot is increasing in size. As you all know, where does falling roles come from? It's not statutory, it's a local decision. You take that pot out of the schools block, and the larger the pot you take out of the schools block, the less money you will get. So, we're trying to consider all those factors. I think it's great that you all had a really good look at the working group, at the recommendations, and I think, Marielle, I'm correct in saying that everything that you did agree has been proposed and recommended tonight. Andrew's absolutely right. When we had a look, we met 47 you will come here this evening, Sarah and I, Anita, Andrew met, and we had a look at the recommendations from the working group, and we would support them, recommend them to you all, but there is an additional recommendation that's come through from further officer review, and I think that is acknowledging that we did have, and again, schools gave fantastic support at very short notice to our Afghan evacuees. We didn't know at the time when they arrived in the 3 hotels what level of funding we get from the DFE, and we locally that we would put that funding in place. We did actually get significant funding from the DFE, and I hope schools that did have those children on roll feel that we allocated that money, we passported it straight through. So again, I think the factor here, and welcome people's views tonight, is we want to try and keep the falling roles total pot at a manageable level, so there's as much money as possible in the schools from. Therefore, the additional proposal from officers, I guess, but through consultation with the chair, is to, if you like, take those schools out of that latest formula proposal. It does mean that a smaller number of schools benefit from falling roles, but there's an acknowledgement that those schools did get other money through the DFE. The last point I'd make is, sadly, it's not an equal system here. So, there was money for Afghan evacuees, and we did manage to get them all on roll to get the ARPU for the previous financial year. But as you know, for some Ukrainian refugees, they didn't get funding from the DFE, that we couldn't passport to you, but they did for others. So sadly, it's not an equal system. So just be really transparent with you and say, those are the reflections we had, which brings you to these recommendations. Probably also worth adding, Anita, that we've still got the ongoing criterion around school balances, haven't we?
Yes, we have.
And I might ask, so I always forget which percentage applies to which phase.
Yeah, so within the current falling roles criteria under section 3, it says that schools with estimated balances above the levels considered excessive by the ESFA do not qualify for funding. That's primary with balances above 8% and secondary with balances above 5%. So
that's another mitigating factor. So in other words, if your balance is above that level, you wouldn't be eligible even on these new criteria. Of course, the other thing I'm reminded of looking at the DFE guidance is that our decision at Forum in relation to criteria should be based on the fact that we expect those places, those vacant places, to be filled again within 3 years. Now we're going to come on to Wendy's projections. We think things are stable. Yeah, we're not projecting an increase. Nevertheless, locally, I think we're saying we would still want to provide a limited amount of falling roles funding. So that's just another factor to bear in mind.
I think there's I think if I memory serves me wrong, when we were dealing with this situation, this was part of the conversation, was that we were told by the local authority that these were transitory pupils, that they were coming in and out, and not to factor them into our long-term planning.
Yeah.
So I suppose part of the consideration is if we factor them into the falling roles fund, that is really for falling roles based on really the projections that we're seeing in the system that we know about residents. And it could mean that we're double funding some schools, where some schools that don't trigger the normal falling roles but took Afghan students could potentially miss out on funding. Peter?
Sorry, just to point out from, in addition to Ian's points, that we have got this development of housing on sites in the north of the borough, so presumably we're going to have to take that into account of the temporary, or at least changes in not only the number of pupils in the borough, but also the geographical distribution.
Yeah, and that's something we can come on to Wednesday, because we do have a formula there that looks at plan developments and what the child yield might be, so we can come on to that piece absolutely.
Jackie.
I'm just wondering when children stop being children.
You just made a great noise.
But that's the real
I'm
challenge.
asking a really simple question. When did it stop being transitory? What's the definition of that?
We were told that they were coming into the borough and they were going to be relocated. I mean, it was that. I think that was clear from the very start that, you know, if they were still here and on our rolls,
Which
then
they
I
are.
think that would be
Which they are.
So,
Very few.
and then they would be
We've got
funded.
44.
Then you're funded because they're on your roll and on your.
But they will also then, you just talked to Stephen only talked earlier about having colleagues on contract. We have had colleagues on contract for 2 years. They are permanent employees. If you decide not to provide falling roles funding, we will just have to cut staff pay.
Is this specific to your school?
It is, unfortunately. And normally I wouldn't make these points, but it is specific. And actually we'll have to cut staffing. When we cut staffing, we'll have to make people redundant, and that money will have to come out of the budget. We're a maintained school, and it will just end up coming out of DSG anyway.
I think the point relates to two schools, doesn't it? Yours and mine. That you took the bulk of the African refugee. It's not something that applies to my school. We have a few left, but not the quantity you do. And I disagree with you about how the funding should go forward. I don't think they should count as part of the problem.
I can understand why you think that, but I do think that actually the overall impact on the school is that we now have to find money to make sure that we actually can just keep our staffing stable. It's inherently unfair when those children were there, now they're not there, and the criteria was the criteria, and now you decide on different criteria, and that's just applied to these particular children.
Because they were evacuees and not refugees.
But they've been there 18 months.
No, but they were evacuees that were funded differently, weren't they? With different underwritings from the local
Which had to be
authorities.
spent in that financial year.
But they still counted as well.
They did, just as any child does. Just as the
But, I
children
mean,
that
I think
are in
there's, I mean,
the NBC children I met today.
I listen, I totally empathise with the position, but this is money that's going to come out of other children who are on roll in schools that have falling roles as well.
They are all children on roll.
But if they're no longer on roll or in your school,
Just
we're
like
looking
any other
at-
child that
and
has
we're looking at budgeting from April 1st. And again, we knew that these students, the local authority were clear with all schools that they will be here for a period of time, your strategic long-term plan should not be on
So-
these students. It might beg the question about offering permanent contracts.
So the embassy children that I enrolled today, 12 of them, I shouldn't factor into my role.
I'm not saying that, and I don't know about the embassy children.
I'm just saying that they're going to be here for a similar amount of time.
You may need to take on temporary staff rather than permanently employed staff. Contract staff. The other thing I would say, if you remember the great debate about falling roles back in the day, there were a good number of schools, I think it was about 9, I think it was, that were really, really struggling. When these Afghan evacuees came in, all of those 9 schools in the big meeting that we had online were desperate to have those kids. So if schools kind of bid to have those kids and were fortunate enough to have the funding pro tem, I'm not really sure that the other schools should then be giving up money in the form of the falling roles to those schools that had that temporary good fortune, shall we say, in your 2 schools specifically.
It was actually
maybe-
two schools, one school. Colford didn't have any.
Sorry, what?
Only one school had the children. I mean,
No,
our
Hartlepool.
okay.
I was
And
scared
Clement at St James had children as well, and I have to say that I do accept the argument that, you know, is it going to impact other schools? You know, we got a big windfall. We not only did we get the money from the number on roll, but we also got some additional funding from the DFE. And I just feel like we did very well out of that.
We
at
also
that time.
attracted some sort of donations, etc. There was a lot of goodwill that came in around those students. So I certainly don't think that it's a bad thing to have, and I don't think schools like Sarah's or other full enrolled schools should.
All of the secondary schools took students to Chris.
Is there anything we can do about this in this forum, actually? Because I think this is something that's happened, there's been winners, there's been losers. That's, I mean, I'm not sure.
What is
where
the
we go with
definition
It's almost how
of
to
the children.
define an application for
So,
falling
coming
roles.
back to the question, how long do you have to be around to be transient?
I think it's, I
Is
think
there a
it's,
piece of work that needs to be done which actually safety nets that not actually, we can't do that here?
well, I think we've always acknowledged, you know, we're within London Borough, we have higher levels of mobility than national levels of mobility, and some children who've come in a year will be enrolled for centre stay, others won't. Then, of course, some of those children you're funded for leave, but others arrive, and that's always been the way. The point perhaps I was going to make, Jodie, obviously we've just, I think Forum's just made a decision to put 200k aside again for supporting schools with the cost of restructures if they meet eligibility, and fully appreciate the challenges about having to restructure. So that is another route for any maintained school, obviously depending on their balance position, to apply, if they're not eligible for falling roles, to apply for one-off restructure costs to be funded. So that, I think I'm right, so that is a route that, you know, a school such as
Can I
yours should
just
look at.
add that the issue isn't about transient nature of the students or not. The issue was with the evacuees, different to refugees.
Yes.
We were the designated local authority, but they all fell. So
That's
there was a disproportionate bubble of these kids that happened very, very fast. We had to deal with them, and then they were going to be moved on. Other refugees come into whatever council they come into, it's a very different situation. And there will be some transients in a way. The winners and losers in any year in any school.
Yeah, sorry, I should clarify my use of that word is to point out the local authority were clear that they were not planned to remain,
Exactly.
but become resident
Yes.
of the local authority.
Yeah. It really is how we define the role. I mean, I don't disagree with Jackie. They were on the roll, we were paid for them as part of our role. Our role has now fallen. What we need, and I don't know if this is the right committee to decide, somebody needs to decide whether those children are able to form part of a falling role for the definition of this extra funding.
And you know, that's a local decision. So as I say, it's a local decision whether to have a falling roles fund or not. We always have, and I would recommend that we continue to have one. I think it's a really good support mechanism. It's a temporary support mechanism. We've looked to tighten the criteria, frankly, through the work you've done in the working group led by Mariella, which I would support. And then being really upfront with you, officers have put in a further recommendation, given, if you like, the exceptional nature of the funding linked to the Afghan evacuees, as opposed to other in-year admissions. But you know, ultimately, I guess we'll see if we can, I guess, move to a vote to support the, you know, all the working group proposals and the additional, I'm going to say, officer proposal, or not. Obviously, we could take that decision away otherwise. But I mean, we've always sought to work, you know, in partnership with Forum to try and decide it here.
Evacuee children
Yes.
are different to refugee children.
Yes, and that's the change. So obviously we know those numbers, we know those extra funding, and that's why we've made that change in the column in Appendix C, and not for other, what I'm going to call in-year admissions.
Yeah, so Ukrainian children, for example, would be this.
Haven't been removed in the same way.
The
So if you
unique
know,
one-off scenario.
because some Ukrainian children got extra funding for DfE and some didn't. It's too complex, it's not fair.
Absolutely, Afghan arrival, the ones that are arriving now per month.
They're
under the government
refugees.
scheme. No, they're not. They're under the government scheme that arrive 400 a month and distributed across the country. Will they be treated the same as the previous evacuees? And I'm just wondering.
That's the DfE decision, sorry, Lisa, just to say, I mean, through colleagues in housing and, you know, here at the council, we've been really clear that, you know, whilst we do have some spare primary places, we do not have any secondary places, and it is not right to place more Afghan families here in KNC in one of our hotels, when actually, I mean, I know obviously secondary colleagues in the room who went above and beyond, and we worked through all sorts of scenarios to try and meet their needs. In the end, we were making arrangements with schools in Brent, putting transport on, and actually the Home Office did listen, and they did hear that actually we just couldn't meet those needs, particularly for secondary school places. But for those boroughs that are meeting needs, JD, that's a DfE decision whether to provide additional school funding. We're not involved in that because we haven't had a further, hotel take-up of families.
So basically you're saying that because the DfE decided to give more money to this group of children, that these children are not eligible for base funding, that they should ordinarily achieve.
Well, they're being funded in the boroughs they're in now.
No, they're not. They are being funded there, but and they were being funded here, but not ordinarily. If there were a different type of child leaving the school, then they would be funded. Is what you're saying. Or any other child from anywhere around the world, the schools.
You mean in the falling roll of the roll?
Are we going to vote on this now?
Yes. Okay. Right. So.
Sorry, before you put the motion, what is the officer's proposal? What is the officer's additional proposal?
It is to adopt the allocation model as set out in Appendix C, which means that under those criteria, and the opposite criteria, that's right, is going to that 3 schools would be eligible, taking all the criteria into account, and they're Bousfield at around 50,000. They are St Francis 16, 17,000, and R. Brunel Private Academy 38k.
Yeah.
The Appendix C in actually the colleges, it's in the A6 agenda pack.
Okay, well that's right, yeah. Thank you. I thought I was.
And you can see that, the workings are shown on Appendix C, Peter, so you can see the schools that might have got the funding, but with the full set of proposals we brought to you now wouldn't.
Yeah, it's the one that's got it's actually as Andrew says, the one right at the end of that paper. It's got a green column in it. It's got the paper version. It's that one.
Page 44 of the package.
Okay. Shall we take a vote on this? So, ask the committee to note the report and endorse the recommendations in 7.1, which are to limit the allocation to schools to approximately 2 years, maintain the criterion funding of 100% ORQ rate, and also I think it should be noted in there to accept the proposals from officers around set out in appendix number 8.
Appendix C and D.
I wonder if you want to separating these points out. I can't lump them all together.
I think you need to vote on this.
Well, I don't have that one.
No, but we can do those.
Well, we're not going to. Okay, fine. So let's do 7.1.1 limit allocations to schools maximum 2 years.
Yeah.
You happy with that? Maintain the current criteria funding of 100% of the ORQ rates.
Yeah.
Okay. And shall I insert a new one?
I would suggest maybe the change of the wording, Andrew, on 4.1.2. Note that the proposed allocations, as set out in appendices C and D, which is the 3 schools that we've highlighted.
Yeah.
And then brought to this forum, etc., subject to the falling roles business case.
Which should of course be 7.1.3, not 4.1.2.
Yeah. Good point, Alison. Thank you.
Okay. So note the proposed allocations in C and D brought to this school forum will be subject to individual schools submitting a falling roles business case for approval at the March 23 schools forum. No, it should be agree that.
Agreed.
Okay, can I just count just to go? 1, 2. Mando, you.
Sorry, yes.
Okay, so that's agreed. Okay. Okay, all right, let's move on to paper A8, which is Wendy and Ian as well, which are the school-based planning projections.
Just to say, as Wendy finds her seat, I know a number of you have seen these projections already at primary heads, secondary heads, governance forums. So I think Wendy is going to highlight a couple of the key points, and I've also been asked to give some feedback to the Education Partnership Board, which a number of you are members of, which I'll do straight after Wendy's presentation.
Did you prepare the paper? Because you didn't put your name in it anyway.
Yes. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Yeah, 5 miles.
Yeah, oh yeah, I'll have to copyright it, definitely. Okay, yeah, so thanks everyone. As Ian said, I think many of you have seen this paper already, so I'm not going to go through each page because you probably, I've probably a bit of overkill on this space planning now. But just want to just highlight a few points. Firstly about primary and then about secondary. I think, on a good note, I think Kensington and Chelsea are in a much better place than some of our local boroughs, particularly Westminster. Yes, there's still concerns, obviously, about the surplus of places. We're still seeing a slight increase in the surplus of places. But if you look at the current surplus now, if you take October census that we've just had, it's moved to about 15.4% or 15.8%. I looked at October census last year and it was 15.4%, so it's actually only moved slightly. There was a dip in the May census. I think that might be something to do with the refugees and evacuees that obviously made the surplus reduce slightly. But that just shows you that isn't a permanent picture because it's gone back to what we were looking at last year, around about 15%. Doing the projections, the pupil price projections, which I always say is an art and not a science, but taking into account all the cost of living crisis and Brexit and everything else that's going on locally and nationally. For primary, we're looking at, if we do nothing, if we stay as we are without any further plan reductions, the projections are looking at about 17% surplus in about 5 years' time, which if you look at it against the national and London average is below that. So it might sound a lot to all the colleagues in the room, but actually that's not bad compared to the rest of London at the moment. I don't know if any of you've seen the recent media, the London Council's paper. I think it was on the news as well.
Have it here, Wendy.
Oh yes. So I have got an updated paper that you haven't got, but I will circulate it. It includes this map here. So we've got a heat map here of London that's just been produced, and you'll see Kensington and Chelsea just in the middle here, which is quite light compared to a lot of other boroughs in London. So if you're looking at these boroughs here, this is the surplus capacity that's growing across London. So it's not just a Kensington and Chelsea issue. And you can see Westminster, our neighbours next door, which currently has a 25% surplus. So I'm sitting here feeling quite confident that we're actually in a fairly comfortable position, and that's not to say that there isn't work that still needs to be done. I mean, Chris will know that Oxford Gardens have recently consulted to reduce the plan from 60 to 45, so that isn't taken into account in this surplus, and I can't take it into account because it doesn't take into effect till 2024. But Oxford Gardens, like several other schools, are operating with an informal cap in order to manage staffing and resources. The picture, as shown in the presentation, is that there's more surplus in the north than there is in the south of the borough. That's pretty much been the case historically. That doesn't mean that the south is roughly about 9-10%, which is actually quite a comfortable surplus to be working with, because we still need to allow for mobility and in-year. We were talking about in-year earlier, and even though we are seeing surplus, quite a large surplus, interestingly, the in-year has increased a lot. And in that London Council's paper, you'll see that being reported, that London boroughs are reporting quite a huge increase in in-year admissions. I mean, officers in my team are processing applications every single day, and a high majority of them, or proportion of them, are refugees and asylum seekers. And that isn't necessarily ones that are going to just come for
a short time and then go. These could be families that may stay long term. Also in the paper there is I've touched on the housing developments. I know Peter, you mentioned earlier about housing. When we do pupil place projections, we do take into account approved housing developments. So the housing development that you're talking about isn't quite approved yet, it's in the pipeline.
Oh, right, okay.
So while it's in the pipeline, we don't always know if it's ever going to happen. So what we can't be doing is reducing projections that takes into account children that isn't there yet. And that has happened in the past, not in Kensington and Chelsea, but some boroughs have done that, and then you end up with lots of free schools, and then they don't. I'm not saying. I wouldn't say. So that's why it's really important to do projections annually. So we're always taking into account housing developments if they have been approved, because then if you do have say 3,000 units on the Kensal around the Ladbroke Grove area, then you're not going to be seeing the surplus of places that we have in the north at the moment. But what we may not need is additional schools, because we may have sufficient capacity there to accommodate any additional children that may come to fruition from housing developments.
Wendy, so you're obviously noting where these children are coming from. Has there been any drift from the private sector into the state sector?
I would say no. No. So I have put some slides in there just to give you a taste of, for some of you that are not familiar with the trends in Kensington and Chelsea. I think most of you are, because you've all been around for some time. But
thank you.
It was a compliment.
Yeah, it's a big. So the independent
42%
is
42% of residents take up the independent sector place either in borough or in the independent school or borough.
So Kensington and Chelsea is actually the highest in London of independent. Yeah. And if you compare it to national, Westminster is slightly lower, and Richmond and Kingston is the next borough that has a fairly high independent sector.
And just to say, when sort of chipping in here, in secondary it's even higher. So our proportion of secondary residents in the independent sector in borough or out borough is at 55.5%. So again, it's the highest in London. And I think that's why, exactly as you say, David, you made an interesting point earlier about, might there be some changes given, perhaps change in charitable status. This is why we have to look at the data annually and analyse it, because we have got some, if you like, peculiar features in the very best way here in KNC. And, if there were a sudden move into the state sector, we might not have enough places. We don't have enough places already in secondary, so we need to keep an eye on that. I mean, just to say, in terms of the original work of the ISOS working group, one of the recommendations was to maximise pupil numbers. We all accepted that here at Forum, and I know schools are doing great work to do that, and it makes some of that work maybe around the margins. We've still got the highest proportion of Ofsted outstanding schools in the country. That makes a difference. So I think we are doing really well to say to those parents who might consider state sector, hang on, fantastic facilities, highest portion of outstanding schools. So,
better chance of getting into Oxbridge as well at this stage.
Yeah, good point, Amanda. If that's your route, absolutely. So I think there are some positives there. I mean, you may have said when I just stepped out, that actually our real pressure is at secondary. That's what the projections are telling us.
Yeah, I'm just going to come on.
Go for it. Sorry, in other words, be quiet, Ian.
So I think that's a little bit of a good news story with primary. It's not, if I was in the Westminster Schools Forum, it wouldn't be so positive. So secondary projections is where we need to have more of our focus. If you have a look at the slides that I produced, you'll see that we have a 5.2 percent deficit in secondary, which basically means all our secondary schools are full, and actually they're not just full, they're all above their PAN published admissions number. It isn't uncommon for secondary schools to go over their published admissions number. They can do that, and most of our secondary schools do that, and it's been really helpful for us, particularly at the secondary transfer point. primary to secondary transfer, and also for fair access placements, where the majority of our hard to place pupils are actually placed through the mechanisms of fair access. And that is because we have no schools with vacancies where they can go to. But bearing in mind, schools are happy to go over numbers, and they can accommodate a little bit. There's a lot more flexibility in secondary because schools are larger. There's a limit on what schools can admit, and we can't keep asking schools to take bulge classes and to admit way above their admission. So one of our objectives is, as a result of, we did receive basic need funding for 2023-24, and basic need funding is generated through the annual SCAP return, which we do. It's a mandatory requirement to return a school capacity survey to the DfE every year, and that's what they use, the mechanisms they use to identify boroughs that need to put in more places, and that's how we receive our basic need funding. So the basic need funding can only be used, it's only ring fenced for the purpose of putting in additional school places, which will either be a new school or an expansion. We obviously don't need a new school, we don't need a whole new school here, but what we do need, or what we would like, is additional places. So just before Christmas, I think it was, Ian wrote out to our 6 secondary schools and asked them all to express any interest in expanding their school, and this will be paid for by Basic Need Fund. And our colleague Andrew come back to us for All Saints and has agreed that he would like to expand by a further form of entry. Andrew already expanded by one form of entry, and you will know that All Saints is a very oversubscribed school now, very popular. So to expand by another form of entry is actually a really positive decision. So that's where we are going to hopefully put some more additional places in.
Definitely, and I think colleagues will know, creating extra capacity is always a long-term plan. So phase 1 that started 4 or 5 years ago, obviously completed a scheme at All Saints. We're just really embarking on a complex and very exciting scheme, David, at your school.
We'll hopefully finish it in December.
Indeed.
And several years to get off the ground.
Absolutely, which tells you how complex it is, as many of you know, you've had building schemes at your site, how hard it is to get the schemes agreed through planning, get consensus with everyone, and find the capital. But as Wendy says, we're now looking, I suppose, at a final round of expansion. So DfE has given us that capital funding for a reason, because we don't have sufficient secondary places. So that really is our challenge. And in summary, primary appears to be stable. The minor reductions in PAN have helped to meet the ISOS target, and really the priority, always need to keep primary under review, absolutely, particularly in the houses brought, but the priority really is a further modest expansion at secondary.
Sorry,
So sorry, am I understanding that there is going to be expansion at Kensington Aldridge?
That was already agreed.
That was already agreed.
It's just taken us a very long time to actually do it. I mean, I think the basic need funding that we had for the extra students at KA was in 2020.
It was.
Yeah, it's just that we haven't been able to actually build the classrooms for a number of different reasons, but we are now.
Right.
And like Wendy's saying, we've actually taken the additional students in advance, so it's very crowded at the moment. But the classrooms will come online soon. All I was going to say was, am I right in thinking that Cardinal Bourne is expanding their 6th form? Did I see that or there's a plan to do that?
It's out there, consultation.
Okay.
Obviously, because we're aware, because it's not statutory at school age, we don't see lead that work in the same way, but yeah, mindful of those changes.
And it wouldn't be linked to 7 to 11 because, but in terms of anything you do in in 11 to 18 school, anything you do at one end affects what you're doing at the other end, but it's not because you're tapering the numbers from year 11.
Okay. Any questions on board feedback or?
Yeah. Sorry. So what's happening at Cardinal Vaughan? My hearing's a bit
There was a consultation that was circulated to the other schools about whether we would be submitting a bid for post-16 funding.
Right.
In the same way as the shortage of places for 11s to 16, there is a chronic shortage of post-16 places.
Right, okay.
The bid deadline's not completely closed yet, and final decision is yet to be made.
But the basic need funding that Wendy alluded to is only for children of statutory school age. It's only to 5 to 16 year olds. And what we're saying is our evidence submitted, it's in front of you, is that we've got a shortage of secondary places. The DfE has acknowledged that, hence they've allocated us the funding. Hence we're on phase 2 of seeking a further modest expansion. If I briefly, Andrew, just to say, we had this discussion at the Partnership Board back in last term, didn't we, Wendy? And I think the key, and I know some of you were there, so please correct me if I miss anything else. I think there's an acknowledgement of the fact to see, particularly the falling birth rate in London, and noting the good progress towards the ISOS recommendation, at least for now. Maybe more changes in the future, but the 1.5 form entry reduction is in line with a 1 to 2 form of entry recommendation. There was some really interesting discussion about potentially having a workshop with schools in the future, and as many of you know, the white paper proposal about having local authority established multi-academy trusts has been and gone. That's been and gone. Obviously, it's still on priority in the education service to sports schools to work in partnership. We know that that's a really good way of retaining strong leaders and teachers sharing back office functions, so we're always keen to support schools with that, and that was encouragement was given by the board. And finally, the board acknowledged that more work needs to be done to provide more secondary places, and we've just updated you on that now.
Okay, thanks, Stephen.
So, secondary places are due to start forming, right?
Yeah, but not by much. I mean, even if they...
500 places,
Well, it's in line with around 3-4 years ago, and I think because you're all over numbers in secondary, it may just lead to schools filling in line with their published admission number rather than being over full.
Okay, but 5 years ago we were expanding primary schools, and now we're all paying the price of having to reduce them again. Are we just aware that that's a potential risk?
It's a good point, Steve. I think you keep your eye on the data. I mean, obviously, as I've just said, in terms of quality, we've literally got some of the best secondary schools in the country. We know that is a huge factor in terms of recruiting pupils, and that children travel a lot further for secondary. But then, yeah, there will be a levelling off compared to how things are currently, and it's something we need to keep in mind.
Do you get what these schools function?
We're not proposing, we're not bidding for a secondary free school. We're really clear about that. This is about a 1 form entry expansion.
I think as well, early indications, it was closing date for reception yesterday. Early indications are that their numbers are slightly up, which is a good thing. Yeah.
Good news.
Yes.
Thank you. Test 5 to 7. Bit of good news.
Okay, right. Thank you, Wendy.
Oh, literally, I just know they're slightly up. Literally, closing date was up yesterday. I can give you a percentage, sorry.
Wendy, thanks very much for that report.
You're welcome.
It's clearly detailed, and ask the committee to note the report, and that final bit of good news as well. Right, final paper this evening is paper N9, which is early years budgets, the initial application and
Okay, so this paper goes through the indicative early years budget for the next financial year, with an attached appendix detailing how we've calculated the rate of providers. The focus of this paper is the early years entitlement for 3 and 4 year olds, which is the bulk of the funding. But the table on the first page does set out the initial allocations across all 6 funding streams, comparing 22, 23 to 23, 24. You'll see there's a net increase in the 23-24 indicative budgets across the 3 and 4 year old universal and working family allocations, though probably not by as much as we'd all hope. As usual, though, these figures are indicative, not in terms of the rate, though, just in terms of the overall funding, because at the moment it's based on the January 22 census data. It'll be revised for January 23 and then revised the following year for January 24. The full calculation behind the hourly pass-through rate is in Appendix A, but just the high-level summary would be that setting aside budgets for deprivation, SEN inclusion fund, and a bit of contingency from the 95%, the hourly rate has been calculated at £7.19 per hour for providers in 23-24, which is an increase of 14p from the current 22-23 rate of £7.53. The 23-24 hourly rate for 2-year-olds has increased in line with the DfE's national hourly rate rise from £6.87 to £7.56. The budgets for early years pupil premium, disability access fund and the maintained nursery supplements are ring-fenced, so they're excluded from the hourly rate calculation. But it is worth noting section 2.11 of the report, in particular the monthly increase in the maintained nursery school supplement rate of 17p. I'll probably leave it there. A few minutes up.
That's impressive.
1 minute for questions.
Okay, any questions or comments on early years funding?
I was like, thank you. And we just looked to know, we don't even have.
Yeah. So, Schools Forum are recommended to note the following: 3.1, 3.2, 3.3, 3.4. I won't read them all out there.
3.4, I have to agree.
Oh, sorry, I thought it was a note. So, note 3.1, 3.2 and 3.3. Thank you, Amanda. And then 3.4, Schools Forum is asked to consider the content of this report and agree the hourly rate of £7.19 to be paid to providers of early years childcare and education 23-24 as set out in Appendix A. All in agreement? Agree. Okay, great, thank you. And any other business? A10, any other business? Okay, great, thank you. That concludes Schools Forum. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Andrew. 2 hours on the dot, 2 hours and 1 minute.